this project was about helping families that have an adult family member with intellectual disability to support and expand that person's social inclusion. By social inclusion, I mean things like having friends and seeing them regularly, joining local community groups, or having valued roles like being a volunteer in your local community. The reason that we focused on families is because most people, including young adults with intellectual disability, live with their family. And the methods that we used to help families to support social inclusion were ones that were drawn from earlier research that we did working with disability support staff in group homes who themselves were supporting their clients to improve their social inclusion. Social inclusion is important for people with intellectual disability for a number of reasons. Firstly, people with intellectual disability themselves say it's important. They want friends and they want to participate in their community. Secondly, families also say it's important, especially when their family member leaves school. Third, there are real benefits of social inclusion, including more social support, greater well-being and better health. Finally, there are also detriments of the absence of social inclusion. We know from research that people with intellectual disability are more lonely, and more of them are lonely than people in the general community. So for all of these reasons, social inclusion is a really important issue for people with intellectual disability. We began with 117 families that expressed some interest, but over time, as we invited people to attend meetings to find out more and then to participate in the project, there was a considerable loss of individuals and families, and the final group that completed the entire project over 30 months was 17 families and 18 people with intellectual disabilities. There were quite a few families who were initially interested in the project who didn't participate. One of the issues at the core of this was that this project was based on the idea of family effort. In other words, the families themselves had to do the work to support their family member to be socially included. They had to make the approaches to other community members or to community groups to help their family member to make a new friend or to join in that group. Now that suited some families, of course, but for many it didn't. So turning now to the outcomes of the study, what benefits there were for people with intellectual disability and families, we found that people acquired new friends and also re-engaged with old friends who they'd lost touch with. Quite a few joined community groups, and a number also undertook social roles in their community, typically by volunteering. Connecting with old friends was a particularly effective strategy in this study. New friends were also part of the picture, but one advantage of involving families in this is they had a very detailed knowledge of who their son or daughter's former friends were and which of those friends were really important to their family member. And for those reasons, it was more straightforward for them to reconnect with those old friends. As well as friendships, there was also participation in community groups. Quite a few people joined different sorts of community groups that are based around special interests that were shared amongst the members, including the person with intellectual disability. These might be sports-related or sports fan groups, in one case an anime group, line dancing, all sorts of things. As well as that, one mother established a new group, a youth friendship group at their local church. Lastly, there's the area of valued social roles, and this involved people volunteering in a variety of organisations within their community, museums, churches and other local community groups where they could actively contribute to the operation of that group in a positive way. Families also encountered a number of positive outcomes. A number of families were very pleasantly surprised of how willing community members were to befriend and support their family member with intellectual disability if asked. Others more fully realised what their son or daughter could contribute in social situations, what their gifts were. And finally, over time, as people participated in the project through the 30 months that it was operating, people's expectations of what was possible in terms of social connections and friendships increased. And so at the end of the project, they were more positive about the opportunities that were available currently and in the future. One of the things we asked families was which amongst the activities that we exposed them to and the information we gave them was helpful. They said that the methods for supporting social inclusion that they were taught were helpful and worked well. Another component, and I guess this is something that we all encounter, is that they found the deadline of having to come back to the next project meeting really helpful to get them to take action in order to be able to report that it had been successful, or at least they'd had a try. In addition, families reported that sharing ideas with other families when they met together with the researchers at the regular project meetings was also helpful, and they were able to offer ideas and pick up ideas from other families in a sharing kind of way. So the implications of these findings for future research and service are that although this worked quite well for some families, we found that those were families that on the whole had better resources. They'd been able to work their way through the disability support system to ensure that they had in-home support for their son or daughter, or they had a particularly stable family situation which enabled them to take the time and to expend the effort that's required to build these social connections. But for many other families, that was an insurmountable difficulty, and they were really looking for alternatives such as friendship groups or inclusion efforts that were supported and implemented by somebody else, such as paid staff. So the indications for the future really are that both in research and service, we also have to accommodate those families for whom a social inclusion approach based solely on family effort is not going to be suitable. And all families are unique, and that was certainly true in this study, that the positive outcomes varied from one person to the next, and likewise among the families that chose not to participate, clearly their needs were different from those that did, and we need to be able to accommodate those families as well.